Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is a Ukraine War Update extra video, giving you extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. I'm going to talk you through a whole bunch of different things. I've recorded this yesterday because I've got so many things on today, which for me is tomorrow, if you get my meaning. Yes, anyway, not that it's particularly relevant for anyone other than me. So where should we start today? I'm going to talk about F-16s and their limitations. So a bit of a blow for those thinking F-16s are the be-all and end-all. Actually, they might not be. Well, they're obviously not going to be as good as more modern aircraft. But you know, let's have a look at some of the details here. In this context, this is Bryn Tannehill telling us about stuff to do with the F-16s used to train people on simulators, as far as I can work out. Now, before we go there, there's a few pieces of kit we need to talk about first. She talks about AMRAAMs, talks about AGM 158 JASSMs, and Link 16s. What the devil are these? So AMRAAMs, AIM 120 AMRAAMs. So this is an advanced medium range air-to-air missile. It's an American beyond visual range air-to-air missile. So that means that you fire at something you can't see. Capable of all weather, day and night operations, it uses active transmit to receive radar guidance instead of semi-active receive only radar guidance. It is a fire and forget weapon, unlike the previous generation Sparrow missiles, which needed guidance from the firing aircraft. When an AMRAAM missile is launched, NATO pilots use a brevity code FOX3. As of 2008, more than 14,000 have been produced for the US Air Force, the US Navy, and 33 international customers, and it's been used in several engagements, achieving 16 air-to-air kills in conflicts over Iraq, Bosnia, Kosovo, India, and Syria. So let's have a look at the cost is just over $1 million per pop. But of course, there are different variants. They will have different costs. Operational range for the basic ones, 50 kilometers. That can then increase to 105 or 106 kilometers. So 27 miles to 86 miles are the ranges of the different variants. Right, AGM 158. These are the JASSM. These are joint air-to-surface standoff missiles. They are low observable standoff air-launched cruise missiles developed by Lockheed Martin for the US Air Force. They're a large, stealthy, long-range weapon with a 1,000-pound or 440-kilogram armor-piercing warhead. Completed testing and entered service with the US Air Force in 2009. And has been used in a number of other countries as of 2014. There is an extended range version. So these have, what do they have? So here we have 230 mile or 370 kilometer operational range. So you can release these, fly off, and you just still be well behind the enemy lines, or I guess behind the front line. Probably more accurate. So you can fire these off safely and hit anywhere in occupied Ukraine. Okay, what's a Link 16? Link 16 is a military tactical data link network used by NATO and nations allowed by the MIDS International Program Office. Its specification is part of the family of tactical data links. With Link 16, military aircraft as well as ships and ground forces may exchange their tactical picture in near real time. Link 16 also supports exchange of text messages. That's not going to be like, all right, sweetheart, I'm going to be home late today, so you might as well put the slow cooker on and cook us a stew. I fancy that tonight. Not that kind of text message. Different sorts of messaging. Although, can I just say, that's not the sort of text message I'd send. I'm way cooler than that, obviously. So it can send text messages, imagery, data, and provide 2 channels of digital voice. A Link 16 is anyway, that's all you need to know, really. So that's communications, good, half decent bit of comms there, half decent air-to-air missile, pretty decent surface to ground capability, or munition. So a lot of virtual ink has been spilled on F-16s to Ukraine over the past few days. It's looking like it will become a reality. So let's discuss some of these capabilities, challenges, limitations, and best potential uses of the aircraft. Thread below provides a fair bit of technical information on the aircraft, but the short version is that 60-odd former NATO F-16A, B midlife update aircraft are in storage and the most readily available airframes. Now, I think the criticisms are going to come that these are older block aircrafts, and aircraft, and they don't have the capabilities of some of the aircraft still that they're fighting against. And as Thomas Tyner says, there are these fighters available in Belgium, Denmark, Netherlands, Norway. They have 60 plus F-16 AM, BM Block 20 MLU. AM is a one-seater, BM is a two-seater, stored, and another 132 in service, which will be replaced by F-35A fighters. So there are a number of these available. They are going to be replaced, so that's a benefit. It's not like Gripen, where if people are going to give Gripen, it's like, well, what do we have now? There'll be existing stocks that are used and are not going to be imminently replaced. So the big things to take away are important to further discussion, and they are AIM 120 AMRAAMs, JASSM, and Link 16 capable. So those planes, F-16s, can use the things that we just talked about. They also use the AN APG 66V2A radar, which is close to obsolescent. Pulse Doppler, not phased array, PESA or AESA like modern radars. So they don't have great radar capability. And one of the things is that they are smaller, less powerful planes than some of the planes they're fighting against, some of the Russian planes. And power is quite important in radar. Basically, the more power your plane has, the better the radar is. As far as I understand it, I could be wrong. And that means that the bigger planes will have bigger radars, and that then means that they can spot you before you spot them, and that becomes a really big problem in the air. So some things that represent challenges for Ukraine to employ F-16s were written up by the Congressional Research Service, CRS, in a report from March 2023, worth a full read, but I'll summarize it here. So firstly, adapting defense structure. So Ukraine was still in a process of changing from Soviet military doctrine to something closer to NATO when the war started. This includes the Air Force. This could impact effective employment of a NATO aircraft. Next, pilot training. This was highlighted, but is one of the most surmountable problems. Indeed, as we just found out, it's going to probably only take them 4 months rather than 18 months to learn how to fly these planes. Putting Ukrainian pilots through just the training they need appears to take about 4 months, and lots of countries are volunteering. Maintaining and sustaining aircraft. I did a thread on this. It takes time and a mountain of parts to fully sustain an aircraft. Maintainers take time to train as well. This could be partially mitigated by contract maintainers and leaning on Poland and Romania for support. So if they do need maintenance, you don't have to fix them in place by Ukrainian engineers in Ukraine. You can just ship them off to nearby Romania or Poland, and they can fix them up with the existing trained engineers that they have for these planes. You would think, and it is the case, that actually there's a far greater existing logistics train for these aircraft compared to other airframes that are used less widely, and that's a benefit. However, some of the older blocks, they don't make some of the parts anymore, so it's 6 of one, half dozen the other. As indeed she goes on to say. However, I would caution that electronic parts for elderly aircraft like these F-16 MLUs are hard to come by, as they've been out of production for a decade plus. If they break and you run out of spares, you're going to have to micro-manufacture it in a workshop. Munitions. Who is going to provide what? AIM 120s are $1.2 million a pop. The 2023 NDAA didn't allocate any dollars for HARM. Those are anti-radiation missiles. Is the US willing to provide early model JASSM? Thankfully, the F-16 Block 20 doesn't need mods to employ them, but it is a challenge. So they can have these air to surface missiles, the JASSM missiles on board. It appears the earlier versions of them, so that should be all right. Financing. Where will the money for operation and sustainment come from? Operating these aircraft is likely to be more expensive than older MiG-29s, Su-24s, and Su-27s in the Ukrainian inventory. This has to be budgeted for with legal authority, surmountable, but a consideration. The other piece that gets lost in this is a more technical consideration. Simply put, neither Ukraine nor Russia wants to go in each other's airspace because the air defenses are so lethal. Ukrainian has scored kills with Patriot and S-300s. Russia has lots of even nastier stuff. Russian ground-based air defenses, GBADs, are lethal enough that the idea of flying old F-16s with their envelope is suicidal. Drawing them down with legacy aircraft not optimized for the suppression of enemy air defense mission with HARM anti-radiation missiles would be long, brutal, and have a significant chance of failure. This is why we see a Ukrainian aircraft map of the Earth flying, lobbing munitions and getting out of dodge without ever crossing the front lines. They're using terrain to mask them from defenses. They don't want to turn on their radars because those radars allow them to be seen, and so they're just sort of flying really low, lobbing a bunch of stuff and then scooting off. The other massive threat is the Russian MiG-31s and Su-35s flying with long-range R-37 missiles. These have been particularly lethal against Ukrainian MiG-29s and Su-27s. These Russian aircraft can see further and shoot at longer range than the F-16 MLUs. That is a problem. Most people imagine modern air combat to look like Top Gun. In reality, it's mostly fought beyond visual range, BVR. The guy with the more powerful radar and longer range missiles usually wins. So you don't really have these dogfights like, as she mentions in Top Gun. You just like, you see someone on a radar, you can't see them in real life. You know, they're beyond your visual range. Press a button, fire a missile, and then scoot off the other direction, and then hope the missile does a job in taking out the aircraft. Dogfighting is something of an afterthought even in training. While we paid a price for this thinking in Vietnam, radars and missiles and the situation have evolved such that in Ukraine, air-to-air combat has played out as beyond visual range only, and the Russians are consistently winning fights with bigger, better radars and longer-range missiles. The F-16 MLU doesn't change this equation. Its small, antique APG-66 radar can't see as far as bigger, more modern Russian radars on the MiGs and Sukhois. The R-37, so that's that air-to-air missile, has a significantly longer range than the AIM-120C, and it potentially gets worse. Russia has A-50, AEW, and C aircraft for long-range detection, targeting, and queuing. Ukraine doesn't have an equivalent. If they did, it might allow Ukraine to fire AIM-120s at data-linked targets without turning on their APG-66 radars. In other words, how I understand this is a small aircraft like the F-16 doesn't want to turn on its radar because it's then saying, hey, here I am, and air defenses can hit it. But it can link to like a much bigger radar aircraft that would be flying further back, which is itself safe, but it's such a massive aircraft that has much better radar coverage. And you can link it to that and fire your missile, and actually, with the help of that larger aircraft, your missile can do its job. And actually, you don't need to get dangerously close to the enemy aircraft that's got better radar than you. You can still stay out of radar and detection range of the enemy aircraft and shoot off your missile by piggybacking onto other radar planes. But they don't have that capability, whereas Russia does, and so that there's a really big asymmetry there. She mentions a video here that does some simulation. Go and check the simulation of people, trying to do this kind of fighting in the air or on the computer, and it doesn't end up too good for the F-16s. I used to work for the Air Force on their sims to train F-16 pilots in air-to-air combat from 2012 to 15. These videos are a fair representation of the challenges faced by the F-16s in Ukraine. The videos that I haven't really delved into talk about there because won't be able to access them by just me talking about them. I do not believe that giving Ukraine F-16s is sufficient to allow them to achieve even temporary local air superiority with pulsed ops. However, I do see several potential tactical advantages over the current situation. They aren't useless. First is the combination of Patriot's modern radar plus data link of targets will increase survivability of the F-16. So it's not necessarily about being able to see those guys, your enemy, first and take them out, but it's like allowing you to survive longer. It's more defensive than offensive survivability, and improve lethality against targets such as cruise missiles. So rather than being successful against other airframes, actually allows you to take out cruise missiles well within your own territory. So you can fire these F-16s, in your own airspace quite nicely, and then use them to take out these cruise missiles, rather than get air defenses to send their missiles. It may be more advantageous, cheaper, or whatever to use airplanes to do that. I'm not too sure. So improving Ukrainian defenses against attack, somewhat improved long-term sustainability. As hard as it is to obtain F-16 parts and technical expertise from the manufacturer, it's still easier than obtaining it for Russian-made MiG-29s and Su-27s. 3, it contains a It continues the work of integrating Ukrainian equipment, tactics, doctrine, and data sharing with NATO standard systems. If there is to be long-term security for Ukraine, I believe NATO membership is a must. One of the requirements for joining is compatibility. Most important to my mind, number 4, is it facilitates Ukraine obtaining and using the AGM-158 Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff Missile, JASSM. Broadly similar to the Storm Shadow, JASSM would provide additional long-range strike capability against difficult targets. It would also facilitate use of the LRASM missile, which is basically JASSM, but for anti-shipping work. Even a relatively small number of either of these could dramatically shift the balance of power in the Black Sea, particularly the LRASM. That's pretty significant, actually. If this would cause those cruise missile carrying ships and submarines to kind of be even further afield or a sea, then that will be a real help to the Ukrainians, and that navy then becomes even more impotent. I mean, it's not completely impotent; they are firing cruise missiles, but they can't get too close to Ukrainian shores because the Harpoon and Neptune missiles will take them out. Thus, I'm not opposed to moving F-16s to Ukraine. I think it's a good thing overall, but I think people need to be clear-eyed in their assessment of the capabilities and limitations of the system. This is not a Wunderwaffe. It's a 35 to 40-year-old lightweight multi-role fighter with mid-90s upgrade to some mission systems. It is capable of linking to other NATO standard systems and can carry out some more modern weapons. It's not going to grant air superiority. Ukraine isn't going to be loitering over the battlefield dropping JDAMs the way the US did in Afghanistan and Iraq. It may potentially help with the SEAD, suppression of enemy air defenses mission, but it won't draw down most of the Russian air defenses. But in combination with JASSM, LRASM, and AIM-120, it could significantly improve Ukraine's position overall in areas that are critical: defense against cruise missiles, long-range strike, and sea control. That's what she has to say. Then some people sort of talking, discussing this, say, contesting whether isn't old F-16 versus fifth generation fighters a false dichotomy. Haven't there been several blocks of F-16 upgrades since Block 10 and 20, albeit not sitting around in Dutch and Danish hangars readily available to use this autumn? And then she says the block number doesn't change the fact that F-16s are fourth generation. You get these different generations of fighter. We're on to fifth generation now and pretty much moving on to sixth at some point. F-16s are smaller and have less energy to feed to a radar than a big air superiority fighter. That's what I was saying earlier. AIM-120 has significantly shorter range than R-37 regardless. So they've still got the radar missile range asymmetry that is balanced towards the Russians. So, and then people go on to discuss, have that discussion, so on and so forth. That gives you maybe a little bit of more information about the F-16s. Remaining on the air, Defmon is talking about the UK intelligence update, defense intelligence update that came out on the 22nd. Getting short on pilots, are we? He says. Russia is highly likely creating a new elite attack aviation group codenamed Storm. Everything appears to be Storm. Storm Z, Storm, so on and so forth. Storm Shadow. To operate over Ukraine. The unit is likely to consist of at least one squadron of Su-24 and Su-34 fighter bombers and a squadron of attack helicopters. The mix of aircraft types suggests the group will have a primary role of ground attack missions. Credible Russian media reports suggest that the Russian MOD aims to attract highly skilled and motivated pilots by offering large pay incentives and opening recruitment to retired aviators. I mean, you're not really going to get crack pilots trained and up in the air and ready to fight within a short time frame. You could get retired aviators up in the air. That's more likely. The creation of the group highlights how Russia assesses its regular Air Force squadrons have severely underperformed in their core function of conducting airstrikes on Ukrainian lines and are being attrited. I mean, they are losing pilots, not insignificantly. Right, we're going to go now. Actually, I want to stay in the air. I'm going to talk about this next. So the Bundestag deputy Roderick Kiesewetter made a comment in favor of supplying German Taurus cruise missiles in an interview with R&D. He emphasized that these cruise missiles, with a range of up to 500 kilometers, could be a very useful contribution from Germany, and there should be no more red lines here. Defense Minister Boris Pistorius expressed hesitation about the proposal to deliver these cruise missiles to Ukraine. He said he does not want to go into every weapon system and give a hypothetical answer to a hypothetical question. However, these are effectively Storm Shadows, really, or very similar to, as far as I can work out. They even look pretty similar. They work in the same way, which is they are slower, although they're almost Mach 1, but they're, these kind of cruise missiles don't need to be supersonic or even hypersonic. They just go slower, hug the ground, more maneuverable, stay a bit quieter, and then pop up at the end. And it's bunting, isn't it? Where they go up and then come down at an angle with increased sort of velocity, and then change their sensors. I'm sure it must say something here. So mission planners program the missile with the target air defense locations and planned ground path. Then the missiles use a low terrain hugging flight path guided by INS, that's inertial guidance, IBN, TRN, and GPS to the proximity of the target, although it's capable of navigating over very long distances without GPS support. Once there, the missile commences a bunt, climb, maneuver to an altitude intended to achieve the best probability of target acquisition and penetration. During the cruise flight, a high-resolution thermographic camera, infrared homing, can support the navigation by using IBN, and it is also used for GPS-free target attack. The missile attempts to match a camera image with a planned 3D target model, DSMAC. If it cannot, it defaults to the other navigation systems, or if there's a high risk of collateral damage, it will steer to a pre-designated crash point instead of risking an inaccurate attack with undesired consequences. That's nice, isn't it? Don't see the Russian missiles doing that at all, and that is indeed what Storm Shadow does as well. So it's pretty much looks equivalent to Storm Shadow. It seems to be made by Taurus Systems and NBDA, which makes the Storm Shadow. So yeah, that's where you're going to see a lot of similarity. Flight altitude, what do we want? Operational range, 500 kilometers, so 310 miles. So that is, or greater than 500 km. So that would be super useful for the Ukrainians, of course. Right, now moving to show you, hopefully, what doesn't happen too often. Here is an MLRS, is it a Uragan, a BM-27, 220 millimeter MRL launch, multiple launch rocket system. I don't want to blast your ears with this, but let's see what happens. And I'm not sure if that caused quite a lot of damage there. It looks like something went a bit wrong with that launch. And we have, yeah, there's extra fire going on there, and that ground took an absolute beating from that launch. I don't know if that was normal. To me, looks a bit dodge, and he wasn't expecting that much. You could be shredded if you're standing too close to that. Anyway, that's a multiple launch rocket system perhaps going awry. Now, I've wondered about sleep on the front. Now, I'm going to play you this because you can just listen to the sound, but, war is tiring, right? The sleep patterns must be completely screwed. You're not eating consistently, I assume. Grabbing some 40 winks in the midst of a battle, by the sounds of it. Now, the Wagner are very used to being involved in war for financial gain. That's why they're a private military company. I mean, literally, their raison d'etre is for profit. And you can talk about that being the case in terms of many national armies and navies. I wrote an article on this. I shared it with you some time ago, saying that actually the remit is to look after national interests, and national interests are almost invariably, not all the time, but very often, economic interests. And so, when you are protecting shipping from piracy, you're protecting your corporate interests that are in the best interest of your nation. And that's long been the case with protecting boats carrying gold from piracy in the 1700s, right? This is how it goes. So yeah, maybe it's a false distinction perhaps between uh, armies and mercenaries, but really mercenaries are there for they're there to get paid, right, in their purest form. And Wagner had been involved with oil, diamonds, all sorts in Africa. Here, this is the art winery in Bakhmut, and actually there are, what is it, 6 million bottles in the art winery still there. They obviously didn't get them out. Wasn't head at top of their priorities. Um, get that wine out, but you can imagine. You can imagine these guys are thinking, yeah. I mean, they probably had a few parties already. I would have thought that's a lot of wine bottles. It's insane. So there you go. You would assume that Prigozhin has said, "Yeah, no, these are ours. We fought for this territory. We're going to be using this," and it's just incredibly vast numbers of 6 million bottles of wine. It's just insane amounts of wine there. And there you go. So I think Wagner will be making use of that from a financial point of view. Anyway, moving on, we are going to go to the very last thing. I just want to go through that Chris Owicki thread that I talked about yesterday. Analysis of social media messages by relatives of Wagner Group members fighting in Bakhmut shows that January 2023 was likely the deadliest month for the mercenary organization. At least 502 are confirmed to have died, though the real figure is likely many times more. And it goes on to say the independent Russian media outlet Verstka has analyzed tens of thousands of social media posts by relatives of Wagner members with the daily reports published by the Institute for the Study of War, and has found clear correlations with specific operations. It's a bit like Oryx and their visual confirmation of mechanized equipment losses. Here we have organizations pouring over social media to see sort of visual evidence, if you like, or at least reported or evidence of the reports of deaths in social media. They include, quote, messages in which the authors indicated the date of death or provided supporting documents, a death certificate, an extract from the registry office, copies of posthumous award letters, and letters of thanks indicating the place of death of their loved ones. So this is really these are definitely verified deaths, not just like, oh, have you heard Jimmy's died type thing, not that. So this really is a really good benchmarking. Like, at least these people have almost certainly died. From this data, Verstka judges that Wagner began sustaining heavy casualties in and around Bakhmut from October 2022. Messages reporting the deaths of loved ones were infrequent in August and September, when the front line had not yet reached Bakhmut. Verstka says that 55% of the total reported Wagner fatalities in October occurred on just 2 dates, the 24th and 27th of October. This correlates with the Ukrainian forces repelling attacks on a concrete plant and areas around Bakhmut. And the Chris Owicki then links to that event happening on October 24th, 2022. Some video footage there. In November 2022, the number of reports of dead Wagner members increased by more than 250%. And as I was pointed out yesterday on my news piece, that isn't 2.5 times more. That's actually 3.5 times more. 100% is twice as much, right? So if you have like 50 quid and you've got 100% more, you've now got 100 quid, which is twice as much. So therefore 200% is 3 times as much. 250 is 3.5 times. So just maths, eh? So Wagner members, the death of Wagner members increased by more than 250%. That's 3.5 times as they were sent on suicidal assaults against Ukrainian positions. Verska says that reported deaths in the first 2 weeks of the month are evenly distributed on almost every day. 12.5% of reported Wagner deaths in November occurred on the 19th of November, with another spike on the 21st when its members sought to capture Klitschivka and Ivanhrad south of Bakhmut. Reported Wagner fatalities increased by another 250%. So that's 3.5, then 3.5. So it's 7 times what they were in December. 13.1% of them happening on December the 8th, as Wagner was seeking to take the village of Yakovlivka. An assault on eastern Bakhmut between the 13th and 18th of December caused another spike in casualties. At least 1,000 Wagner members are said by the US to have died in December alone. In January 2023, fatalities jumped by another 300%. So that's another 4 times. So now we're up to 11.5 times what was originally the case. So there's a huge increase over these months. The second and third weeks accounted for 54% of all reported Wagner fatalities in the entire battle, correlating with the capture of Solidar. And this is when they were throwing so many people at Solidar. They had their tails up, they could smell blood, and they went in. And this did cause huge numbers of deaths for the Ukrainians as well, but just a lot of Wagner deaths, especially as they were starting to use these human waves of convicts. By this point, Wagner has sustained so many casualties that it was reported to be having problems in removing all the bodies. It was said to be having to, quote, run around the market with the corpses to find drivers and trucks so they could be repatriated. During February 2023, the number of reported fatalities dropped by almost 35%. More than 18% of fatalities during the month occurred on the 4th and 24th of February, correlating with attempts to encircle Bakhmut from the northeast and south. Another drop occurred in March. The reported death toll was about 35% below the February level and 58% below January figures. About 73% of all reports of the death of Wagner members occurred in the first half of March, by when about 50% of the city had been captured. A further fall in reported fatalities occurred in April 2023, but Verska notes that this may be distorted by Wagner being slow to inform relatives of their deaths of their loved ones. By this point, Wagner was fighting towards the city centre. It hasn't yet been possible for Verska to do an analysis of May's reported fatalities, but Frontline reports suggest that this month has been extremely tense and bloody. Wagner head Yevgeny Prigozhin posted a video showing the bodies of dead fighters. By now, as Verska notes, it's likely that Russia has sustained tens of thousands of fatalities in and near Bakhmut. A disproportionate number are likely to have been poorly trained disposable troops. That's scare quotes, disposable troops, recruited from prisons. That gives you, again, some justification for the sorts of figures that the Ukrainian General Staff are claiming, and the sorts of claims about Bakhmut and why Bakhmut was in the best interests of Ukraine in defending it. Yes, the Russians are claiming victory. Yes, you know, it's all about the flags they're putting down, but they might deny that they've culminated. But my goodness, did they lose a lot of troops? But then, of course, the Ukrainians did too. But the understanding is the Russians were losing them at rates that were in Ukraine's favor, even until the last days of holding on to those final buildings. And indeed, as I speak now, it's not 100% certain that Ukraine is out of those last buildings, but I think they probably are. Anyway, that's enough for today's extra. I hope that was of interest to you. Please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you so much to my members. Thank you all to all those who support the channel. Really do appreciate it. Take care. I will speak to you soon.